Before becoming the imposing and feared figure we know, Negan was an ordinary man, a physical education teacher. His life on the surface was like many others. He wasn't a criminal, a military strategist, or a natural leader. He was a man dealing with the complexities of his own personal world, which included a troubled marriage and the difficult journey of watching his wife battle a terminal illness. His life was full of flaws and disappointments, and the helplessness he felt in the face of his beloved wife, Lucille's, illness was a heavy burden. The psychology behind this initial phase is crucial. Negan lived in a state of internal dissonance, where his actions didn't always match who he wanted to be. He sought a form of control in a situation where he was completely powerless. His pain, frustration, and the need to feel useful and important began to germinate in fertile ground of uncertainty and chaos. When the zombie apocalypse broke out, the world he knew fell apart, and the rules of society were obliterated. The brutal and anarchic environment put him in a position where he had to reinvent himself to survive. He realized that the passivity and gentleness of his former life no longer had a place. He began to see himself as a protector, a figure of order in the midst of chaos. His wife, in her final moments, helped him shape this new mentality. Her loss was a devastating blow, but also an opportunity to turn his pain into a driving force. He took the baseball bat, a symbol of his passion for the sport, and named it Lucille in honor of his beloved. This object, once harmless, became a symbol of his new philosophy, a tangible link between his past and his present. He clung to his wife's memory as an anchor, a reason to go on, but also as a justification for his future actions. He was no longer living for himself, but to honor the memory of the woman he loved. Psychoanalysis teaches us that trauma and loss can completely redefine our identity. The Negan, who was a physical education teacher, full of regrets, died with his wife. What was born was a new figure, shaped by pain and necessity. He was in search of something to fill the void left by the loss, and he found in this new world the opportunity to build a new order, a new life. But this search for order and purpose would lead him down a dark path. But there was something no one saw coming, the cruelty that would mix with charisma. The real turning point for Negan was not just his wife's death, but the moment he chose to turn his pain into power. Lucille's loss in an already disintegrated world left a huge void. The pain of grief mixed with loneliness and fear. However, instead of letting himself be consumed, he channeled these feelings into a driving force for survival and, later, for domination. He saw that the world had become a place where the law of the strongest prevailed. The only way to protect himself and those he cared about was to be the strongest force. He began to reinvent himself. The gentle and regretful Negan was replaced by a stronger, more assertive, and, above all, more ruthless persona. He became what he needed to be to survive. This transformation process is a classic example of psychological adaptation to trauma. Instead of submitting to chaos, he decided to control it. His new identity was that of a man who imposed order through fear. The baseball bat, Lucille, became the symbol of this new philosophy. He used it to punish, to show power, and to maintain order. For him, violence was not an act of gratuitous cruelty, but a necessary tool to maintain stability. He began to attract followers, people who were lost and desperate. He offered them protection and a purpose. In return, he demanded unquestioning loyalty and obedience. He became the paternal figure they needed in a lawless world. His approach was a mix of punishment and reward. He created a system of rules and hierarchies that, although brutal, offered a sense of security. To the saviors, Negan was the leader who protected and kept them alive. To him, they were pieces on a chessboard, the foundation of his new world. The psychology behind this transformation can be seen as a defense mechanism on a massive scale. Negan, who once felt powerless, now felt in total control. He became the judge, jury, and executioner. He rationalized his actions, convincing himself that cruelty was the price of survival. He saw the world as a place where kindness was a weakness and strength the only virtue. He believed that by imposing order, he was saving everyone, even if it meant terrorizing them. And that's where everything started to fall apart. The humanity he was trying to protect became, for him, a resource to be controlled. With his new leader identity consolidated, Negan's mind underwent a strategic evolution. He wasn't content to just be a leader. He saw himself as the architect of a new society. His philosophy was that, in a world devoid of laws and morality, the only way to avoid total chaos was through a rigid and unshakable power structure. He used humor, intelligence, and fear as tools to maintain control. His oratory was sharp, full of sarcasm and veiled threats. He was able to involve his followers in a web of loyalty and fear, where obedience was the only option. His distorted mind led him to believe that he was doing what was necessary for the survival of humanity. He saw other groups not as people, but as obstacles to his vision. He used cruelty as a form of discipline, like a father punishing a disobedient child. For him, violence was not gratuitous, but a teaching tool. He believed that by showing what would happen if the rules were broken, he was ensuring everyone's safety. The psychology behind his mentality can be compared to that of cult leaders, where the central figure becomes the source of all truth and power. Negan placed himself above emotions, morality, and ethics. He created a new logic where what was right was what guaranteed the survival of his group, the Saviors. He used psychology to manipulate, to create a sense of belonging, and to maintain the loyalty of his followers. He made them believe they were superior, the saviors of humanity. He also used empathy in a perverse way. He cared about the members of his group, but his compassion was limited to them. To others, he was ruthless. He believed the world was a place of scarcity, and that he was the only one who could ensure the survival of his family. His mind, once that of an ordinary man, had been shaped by chaos, power, and necessity. Cruelty became his strategy, charisma, his weapon, and domination, his ultimate goal. But the real monster was still dormant, ready to be revealed to the world. The point of no return for Negan was not a single act, but the total acceptance of his philosophy. From the moment he raised Lucille and became the leader of the Saviors, his worldview changed completely. He began to see reality through a distorted lens, where terror was the only way to ensure order. He convinced himself that fear was a more effective tool than hope, and that cruelty was a form of compassion. The psychology behind this phase is rationalization. Negan justified his most brutal actions with the need to protect his group and maintain peace. He believed that life, in its essence, was a struggle for survival, and that he was the only one capable of making the difficult choices. He saw himself as a hero, not a villain. His morality was flexible, adapting to the needs of the new world. He created a code of ethics that only applied to his group, and the rest of the world was just an obstacle to be overcome. His mentality can also be seen as pathological narcissism. He considered himself the center of the universe, the only one who could save humanity. He sought the adulation of his followers and the obedience of his enemies. He wasn't just a leader. He was a god. He delighted in the power, in the ability to control life and death. The dilemma for the viewer is, what if, in a lawless world, Negan's logic were the only one that made sense? What if, to ensure the survival of a group, it was necessary to sacrifice morality and humanity? He forces us to confront our own beliefs and values. What would we do in his place? Would we be able to cross the line, to become what we fear most, to ensure the survival of those we love? His story leads us to a deep moral dilemma, and with a disturbing question. What if the only way to save the world is to destroy it? Negan's mind, far from being insane, was coldly calculated. His philosophy was based on a distorted interpretation of human nature and post-apocalyptic reality. He believed that, in a world where hope was a weakness and kindness a risk, the only way to survive was through power. The psychology behind his mentality is that of a leader who uses fear to create order. He didn't just lead, he controlled. He used group psychology to manipulate his followers, creating a sense of belonging and loyalty. His approach can be compared to certain studies on the psychology of power, where leaders, in situations of extreme pressure, resort to questionable methods to maintain order. He acted like a predator who uses force to stay at the top of the food chain. He was not just a cruel man, but a man who acted strategically, coldly, and calculatedly. His cruelty was a tool, and his philosophy the basis of his new world. His mind was that of a strategist who saw the world as a chessboard and humans as pieces. He used violence as a form of discipline to show that the rules had to be followed. He believed that by punishing one, he was saving many. His logic was that of a predator who uses force to stay at the top of the food chain. He was not just a cruel man, but a man who acted calculatedly, coldly, and strategically. It wasn't madness. It was cold calculation, a way to survive in a world where hope was a luxury that no one could afford. Negan's legacy is enduring. His presence shaped the world around him, forcing other characters to confront their own beliefs and values. He not only brought chaos, but also a new form of order, a new way of thinking about survival and morality. He became a symbol, an urban legend, a warning about what humanity can become when hope is gone. His story makes us question, who are we to judge a man who, in a world of ruins, sought to create a structure, however distorted? He became the personification of the law of the strongest, a philosophy that, although brutal, had a logic in a world without rules. He makes us question the limits of morality and ethics. He forces us to confront our own potential for darkness. Psychology teaches us that humanity has the capacity to do both good and evil. Negan, in his essence, shows us what happens when evil becomes the only option. He's living proof that cruelty can be a form of survival, and that hope is a luxury that few can afford. He's not a monster, but a man who turned into one to survive in a world of monsters. But what happens when the monster repents? What happens when he decides to change? His story shows us that, even in the midst of chaos, hope can emerge. He forces us to ask, what happens when evil repents? What happens when darkness seeks light? But maybe he wasn't the last. Negan's story is a dark reminder that charisma can be a tool as powerful as violence. He forces us to question the nature of leadership, morality, and survival in a world where rules no longer exist. His journey is a warning about the fragility of civilization and the ease with which human beings can become monsters to survive. What would we do to protect what we love? To what extent would we go to impose order? His story leaves us with a disturbing thought. What is necessary to survive in a world where humanity is collapsing? And what if, to survive, we had to become the very thing we fear most?